there is one part of that continuum which exhibits the properties we assign to physical matter. And in another part of this continuum, there are the properties, oh, where is this not good? Yes, the properties that we assign to consciousness. And we're suggesting that consciousness is the observer and experiencer of the information contained within physical properties. That defines the interrelationship that exists between consciousness and matter. It's not such a big dichotomy. Matter is information and energy, and consciousness is energy which observes information. That is its basic relationship. So there is this natural connection between the two. So this particular slideshow seems to want. So this is something we've heard a fair bit. Well, we heard it from Stuart, we heard it from Brenda and others yesterday. That physical matter is energy which contains information. So what is that subtle information that is specifying the forms, the behavior of physical matter? In Sankhya terms, we call that the tanmatras. And I want to show you how that works. Think of physical matter as a field. Okay, it's not really showing, there's grid lines, a 5x5 grid, which is not showing up very well in this light. But there at least we've got its grid point references. Okay, and when the data is 0, 0, 0, 0, nothing is manifest. But if we change the underlying data in a field, when I say the data, I'm talking to its grid values. And we're just using a simple scalar value at the moment. So when we change the data values, then what happens? That data, those scalar values become inhered within the different grid points. So that's my A lot. That's A1, A2, A3, A4, etc., B1, B2, B3. Ahankar, which actually represents persona, or the pseudo-self, the pseudo-ego. Buddhi, which is the discriminating intelligence, and mana, which is the mental pool. The Yoga Sutras provides an incredible detail of how these different functions work and how they interact with I don't want to go there, with the material and the physical elements. So what we're suggesting is that perception involves the combination of data gathered from the physical world. There is neural data, but that's actually deficient in information. That data is taken by mana, but it also has to be coupled with other Shabda data present within the cache to join it together in order to get the image manifest as neural activity. But it can also manifest as a physical change. And it really happens according to the system that we talked about earlier, that if you change the underlying information, you're going to change the physical structure that is generated in that field. You don't have to change the physicality, you change the underlying data. That's how the volition of the Atma interacts with the physicality of the world. So I want to just give you an idea of this and discuss specification. In Britain, I don't know if you have it over here, we have a program called Countdown. And the fun game, and my mother was a great fan of this, you get 9 letters, and you've got to find the longest word you can in that. Okay, so you've got 10 seconds to do that. Well, I have a little drink of water. All right, you're coming up with something? All right, quickly shout them out, the words you've got. To manifest the specificity that you wish to enjoy for yourself. And what we're going to now explore, actually I should is just how some of those things affect physics, biology, and even astrophysics. This is the pair mechanical cascade that they used. We mentioned those yesterday, the experiments both on quantum random event generators and on mechanical systems that demonstrate how intent affects physical output. I'm going to show you another one, the rice experiment. It was raised yesterday. Someone asked about the water effect, the gunas and the water. Was the person in the room who did that? No. Huh? It was you. I thought it was, yes. Here's an experiment that you can do. It's part of the Japanese professor's experiment. You get some rice, and you put the... Sorry, I've got to get my headphones out.
Okay, good afternoon. So I'm going to carry on from where Martin left off. I'm going to talk about biology and living systems. Specifically, I want to get on to the point of information and life, but that will come a little bit later. So let's start with the obvious question, shall we? What is an organism? Now, it seems like we've obviously answered it, right? Everyone knows what life is. Everyone knows what an organism is. You just look around and, you're a lot of organisms. I can see you here. But actually, from a philosophy of biology standpoint, it's actually a very difficult question to answer, and we'll get into that now. So we've got our subject here. It's our man in the lab coat, and you can see that he's an organism. He's got a kind of barrier around him. He's not kind of just... If he didn't have a barrier, you wouldn't know where he begins and where he ends. So that's kind of the way we define an organism, that you can kind of see it's got a shape. So it looks like a closed system. But if we take it a step further, we can see that everyone is affected and affects the ecosystem in which they inhabit. Basic unit of life. From another standpoint, we've got all the organelles inside the cell, which I just showed you. They're all the little bits of the factory of the cell. Here's the molecular side of the cell. You've got the nucleus and various different proteins inserted into the cell surface membrane. You've got the DNA in the nucleus, and you can see all these proteins, all these molecules are interacting with each other in circles. And basically there's like loads of feedback loops. And this is simple. This is a signaling pathway in the cell. This is like tip of the iceberg stuff. If you actually showed what's happening in a cell, it would take up probably the wall in terms of the interactions that are happening. So it's very complex. Yet we don't think about that. We just walk around and cells just sit there or swim around, whatever they do, and they don't think about their molecules. So how is it all working? It's miraculous, really. I wanted to get onto DNA because it's been mentioned in this conference. I have a slightly different perspective than the classical reductionist approach, and I wanted to share that because it's not only myself. There are many eminent physiologists who are building speed. So what does that mean? Could it mean that DNA is serving the cell? It is a servant of the cell. Molecules are serving the cell. They're not the other way around. The molecules aren't causing the cell to happen or an organism to come about. I was going to show you this, but I don't think I can get it to work. I have to click on the link. Basically, it's showing DNA chromosomes being pulled apart when a cell divides, which is very interesting because if DNA is the kind of, the big boss, it doesn't really look like it. It's kind of, okay. It's on the Chrome browser.
Oh, there's not the play on this?
No, it doesn't work. Okay, don't worry, it's fine, yeah. Let's move to the next one. Okay, you can't see this very well, sorry. But it seems like the main approach coming out of biology now, heavy reductionism is dead, I think is dead. The idea that DNA is the cause of everything. Systems biology is the way forward now. That's leading the way. We can all see that now. Organisms are systems. And what we've got here is the explanation of virtual reality. And you want to be there. You love this life better than anything else. And you love this avatar. And you see yourself, that's me. Now, as I said, I'm not saying the world outside of us is all data. This is just the best picture I could find. I don't know. We don't know what the world is. There's no way of finding out. What we do know is this is what we experience, and Martin has mentioned this term qualia. So we're experiencing qualia. The question I have is, can we express volition that will influence the kind of the world in which we live? Can we affect physical matter? Can we even affect our own physiology and the physiology of others potentially? As Barbara Dunn said yesterday, we shouldn't get carried away in thinking we've got some kind of superpowers. I'm inclined to think that there are rules to the game, as in any game, and most of the time, those who haven't got super elevated consciousness, there are very limited things they can do. Having said that, I do think there's a phenomenon that is ripe for investigation. And that is to do with group consciousness. Maybe individually we can't do much, we can't affect material systems too much, but as a group, my proposal is that we can do this thing which Tamrapani here is also part of the Science and Philosophy Initiative, has been researching into, citizen science. The idea that we can tap into citizens, the public, in order to do science. And consciousness research really lends itself very well to that, because you've got a large group of conscious entities who have the capacity to change living systems. Here's an example of fluorescent bacteria. They're all bacteria on a plate growing, and each bacteria has a little colourful tag attached to its genes, so you've got lots of different colours. And one experimental idea I had is, if you have bacteria on a plate like this that have the gene for kind of fluorescing green, but there's a slight mutation in there, what would happen if you have enough people who are willing them to change to turn green? Would you be able to cause that mutation to switch back, and suddenly there's a lighting up to green, and you can actually measure that in the lab? So that's just a little flavour of the kind of things that we're interested in biology and the Atma Paradigm. So thank you very much.
No one can agree on how it should be put together, because if you use certain physiological attributes, you'll get one tree. If you compare others, you'll get a different tree. If you start using DNA, then it's a question of which gene you're following, and you get different trees for each. And then there's horizontal gene transfer. There's convergent properties appearing when they're not related. It's a mess. Generally, it's accepted that the tree of life is utterly bogus. But it gives a flavor to what is being suggested. Now, I'm just borrowing this one, just to give you an example. And the other thing you've got to know about the tree of life is that the only thing that is there in physical terms on the tree of life are the fruits at the end of the twigs. There are no species ever identified anywhere along the branches. The branches of the tree of life diagram do not represent any particular species. Even the branching points, the punctuated appearance of ancestor types with a potential set of genetic material that can be used. And also, what can you do with potential? As we heard earlier, you can specify it. So that's what happens, and that's what all these little leaves are about. These are the devolved variants that are produced from the potential ancestor type. And that's the effect that is seen through the processes of natural selection and what is called evolution. But that evolution is always, the examples that are given of biological evolution are always microevolution. And actually they are not permanent. They are devolved states of an ancestor type. And to give you one of the best examples of that, the finches of the Galapagos Islands, where, of course, Darwin got his inspiration for all these different types of finches. Oh, they must have come from one ancestor. And yes, they are devolved from some ancestor type, but they're not different species. Now, invasion of, or invasive species of shore crab introduced. They eat the mussels, and they found that wherever there are mussels in proximity of shore crabs, the mussels had changed their genetic makeup in order, or at least the use of their genetic material, in order to change their bodies, the thickness, the way the defense mechanisms of their shells, in order to cope with that, within their own lifetime. So we have to have a completely new way of looking at it, one that is consistent with consciousness coming first, and that the organism is the vehicle of the Atma, and it is the psychological drivers of the Atma for existence, for understanding, and for pleasure. Those three are the drivers of the Atma, which then manifest in the psychology, which sets up the intention, which allows the phenotype, the body, to be developed and to utilize its genetic opportunities. That is our simple picture on that. So we term this process co-intentional transformation. For the ones that would work even before humans might have been there. And then, you see, it was even happening during the plant situation. And of course, there's plenty of studies these days on plants and sharing information, altruism between plants. That's a whole subject which we, it's a great one for anyone investigating in the botany world. But interestingly, there's increase in information during the period when the Earth should be just a rock floating around during the formation of the solar system. So what we're suggesting, does consciousness need to be embodied to have potency? Is there a field of consciousness that is able to be effective in producing information that impacts physical systems and develops it, gives it structure, form, and properties? And then you see, even before the solar system came about, even during the period of the formation of galaxies all the way back, there's increased information.
Presented here by Martin and Ryan. Please don't get worried. I encourage you to attend one of these courses. So anyways, moving forward, I thought it'd just be useful to look at what perspective we've got from the so-called standard model or field theory, and the sort of model that is out there for the world around us. It starts with an assumption that at the beginning of the universe, everything was completely simple, and we can define all fields or theories with this so-called theory of everything, which needs to be homogeneous, needs to be isotropic, and a very simple mathematical kind of model. But then the complexity arises as the universe expands, and then perhaps it's a big speculation that we have a theory of quantum gravity, nothing so far on those lines, but then they break up and manifest themselves as space-time curvature, or what we call the actual theory of gravity happening within space-time, and the so-called electroweak force. Sorry, this pointer isn't working, so I'll just talk through it. And so this is the best model out there. If we want to really account for consciousness, do we say that these particles have consciousness, or is it a different property of our universe, or is it something even beyond that? And then we can get to cosmology, which is on the larger scales the best theory that explains how structure formation took place, how close to the beginning of the universe, what really happened, how do we really explain that? So the best theory out there, or at least the most popular theory, is called the lambda CDM, where these are different ingredients of the universe. Lambda is the cosmological constant. It sprang out of certain Friedman equations, as they're called, and sprang also out of Einstein's work. But this is responsible for the acceleration or the expansion of the universe, the expansion of space-time itself. There's also other ingredients like dark matter, things that honestly we don't know about what they are. And dark matter is responsible for bringing together the matter that we can see and sense, observe through telescopes, and inflation that has been invoked to solve this flatness problem. But it's still sort of a theory out there. There's the abundance ratios of particles versus antiparticles. So why do we see a universe that is so full of particles rather than antiparticles? This is again a technical term. Won't get into too much details. The lifespan of the universe wouldn't have been as much as we see it if it weren't for these fundamental constants like the constant of gravity, the term omega. The formation of stars and galaxies wouldn't have taken place if it weren't for these finely tuned parameters of lambda and dark matter parameters, omega, dm, etc. And then the abundances of carbon and oxygen as we get from stellar nucleosynthesis or chemical reactions happening within stars requires some fine-tuning of the strong force itself. So perhaps I mean, if it were fine-tuned right since the beginning, then things would proceed very easily.
Just wanted to say that although we're presenting the Atma Paradigm as if we kind of know something and have some ideas of answers, this is meant to be a collaboration. We mentioned it to you. We're going to hand out some sheets just to give you a flavor of the sort of things we're into. But we really want to develop these ideas with your help and give us feedback, discuss it, research it. And if you're in research, what we're suggesting, target information, particularly information changes. Whenever there is some situation of high information emerging from low information processes and states, think what's happening. Whenever specificity emerges out of a sort of white noise, whether in physics or in biology or in neuroscience, and Kunal showed the drawings that we had from Stuart from the other day. Now, I've discussed this with Stuart, but I don't necessarily accept his presentation as showing the emergence of being as consciousness. Rather, I think it shows something even more significant. I think he has made one of the biggest discoveries in
the video we showed last night. She's going to go into the little room over here in a fourth breakout at our 3 o'clock breakout, our last breakout, and she's going to show a short video and answer any of your questions. So this is an unscheduled breakout right in that room. Now, we are running behind. One of the most important presentations of today is the 4 o'clock TOVP.